On my 70th birthday, in a restaurant full of guests, my daughter presented me with a piggy bank containing a few coins and said, "Time to start saving for your own funeral, mother. We won't be paying." Her husband and their friends smirked in approval. But when they gave me the floor for a toast, I thanked her and then made an announcement about my will that made her drop her fork. Because, before we begin, I want to thank you for being here. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Please write in the comments and tell me which country you're listening from. I always find it so heartwarming to read your messages from all over the world. And now enjoy the story. The sound of the restaurant was a low, civilized hum. The clinking of glasses. 70 years old. They say it's the age of wisdom, when the hustle and bustle is behind you, and you can finally look peacefully upon the fruits of your life. I sat at the head table in a trendy, coldly lit restaurant, and the fruits of my life were making noise, laughing, and drinking champagne all around me. Only it seemed this was not the garden I had planted. The restaurant was my daughter's choice. "Mother, you can't possibly celebrate such a milestone at home with your pies," she had said then, with a slight impatience in her voice. "It needs to be respectable, beautiful. For the guests." I didn't argue. I had long since stopped arguing. The guests. I scanned the room. A few dozen faces, and almost all of them strangers. Successful, loud, self-assured friends of my daughter, Clara, and her husband Marcus. They discussed deals, foreign resorts, new cars. Their world was made of gloss and numbers. And I, a retired horologist in my severe but elegant dress, felt like an antique leather-bound book that had accidentally ended up on a shelf of fashion magazines. My own friends, the few that were still with me, had politely declined the invitation. Some cited health, others commitments, but I knew the real reason. They simply didn't want to be here, in this kingdom of ostentatious wealth, where their modest pensions and quiet lives would seem out of place. I didn't blame them. To be honest, I envied them. Right now, they were probably sitting in their cozy kitchens, drinking tea with lemon and reminiscing about our youth. And I was sitting here at the center of a celebration held in my honor, but not for me. Memory is a funny thing. The smell of this place, a mixture of expensive perfume and something vaguely synthetic from the kitchen, suddenly pushed all other thoughts from my head and transported me back 40 years. My 30th birthday. A small two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. My late husband, Arthur, alive and smiling, bringing a huge apple pie into the room. The whole apartment smelled of cinnamon and apples. Clara, just a toddler, reaching for me with chubby hands smeared with cream. And there were no guests, just the three of us, and no one else was needed. Happiness back then was so thick, so tangible, you could almost cut it with a knife like that very pie. Arthur, he had spent his life building his collection. Not of stamps or coins, but of antique watch movements. The intricate beating hearts of timepieces. It wasn't a hunt for treasure. No, for him, each movement was a living soul, a conversation across time. He could spend hours telling me the story of a single piece, who had held it, in which workshop it was crafted, what journey it had made before ending up with us. After he passed, these tiny complex mechanisms became my only connection to him. They lay in velvet-lined trays in our workshop, silent witnesses to our love, our shared life. They were my legacy. Clara never understood their value. "They're just old gears," she would say with a wrinkle of her nose. She needed other things, a good education at a prestigious university, then her first car, a wedding that wouldn't be an embarrassment, the down payment for the mortgage on her and Marcus's condo. I looked at my flourishing daughter, dressed in an expensive silk dress, and thought about how many of my husband's precious movements had been transformed into that silk, that condo, that respectable life. I sold them one by one, secretly, through old contacts in the horology world. Each time I parted with one, I felt like a piece of my own flesh was being torn away. But I told myself, this is for Clara, for her future, for her happiness. I am a mother, and this is my duty. "And now," proclaimed the MC hired by Marcus, "a word of congratulations from the one and only beloved daughter of our guest of honor, Clara." Clara rose gracefully, drawing everyone's attention. She picked up a glass and a hush fell over the room. Mother, my dear, beloved mother. Her voice rang out, polished and confident. I want to raise this glass to you. To your kindness, to your patience, to your endless love. You have always been my support, my example in everything. Everything I have achieved in this life I owe to you. Thank you for everything. To your 70th birthday, Mother. The guests applauded. Someone even shouted, "Bravo!" I looked at Clara, at her radiant face, at the way she artfully pressed a hand to her heart. The words were correct, beautiful, the kind one is supposed to say at anniversaries. But I saw her eyes. There was no warmth in them, only a cold, calculating gleam, like that of a person who has successfully completed an important phase of a project. I smiled politely and took a sip of champagne. It tasted bitter and sour. And now for the gifts, the MC announced again. The guests came up one by one, handing me bouquets, boxes, envelopes. I thanked them, nodded, smiled. It all felt like a well-rehearsed play. And then it was time for the main gift. Clara and Marcus approached me together. My daughter's husband held a microphone, ready to broadcast this moment to the entire room. And Clara with a wide, almost predatory smile, held out a small package wrapped in cheap, shiny paper. Mother, Marcus and I thought for a long time about what to give you, she began loudly so everyone could hear. You seem to have everything. So we decided to give you the most important thing. A start to a new life. The opportunity to take care of your own future. Independently. She tore off the wrapping paper. In her hands was a simple ceramic piggy bank. A pink pig with a goofy painted-on smile. The kind sold in any souvenir shop. Clara shook it forcefully. Something inside rattled pathetically. Couple of coins, no more. She placed the piggy bank in my hands. The ceramic was cold and unpleasantly smooth. Time to start saving for your own funeral, Mother, she said, looking me straight in the eye, but speaking the words for everyone. Marcus and I won't be paying. It's a crisis, you understand. Time to be responsible. And she smiled even wider. Next to her, Marcus chuckled approvingly. At the tables, there were restrained but quite distinct snickers. One of their friends even covered his mouth with his hand, stifling a laugh. They found it witty, fresh, modern. In that moment, the world for me narrowed to a single point. I stopped seeing faces, hearing music, sensing smells. The entire huge, noisy hall disappeared. All that remained was this pink pig on my lap and the thin, humiliating jingle of the coins inside it. It wasn't pain. I had felt pain many times and I knew its taste. This was something else. It was a deafening, absolute silence. A silence in which everything suddenly became visible. As if a veil I had worn for decades had fallen from my eyes. A veil of motherly love, of hope, of self-deception. My whole life, all my sacrifices, all the souled movements, all the sleepless nights, all my unconditional devotion. It all came together in that one sound, in the pathetic jingle of coins thrown to me for my own funeral. And in that deafening silence, right inside my head, something clicked. Dryly, distinctly, like the turn of a key in an old lock. Click. It was the sound of a snapped string. The sound of an end. The end of the illusion I had so carefully cherished all my life. The illusion that I had a daughter. That click in my head was not a metaphor. I almost physically felt it, dry like the crack of old wood under an unbearable weight. And after it came that same deafening silence. I looked at the pink piggy bank on my lap. Cold, soulless ceramic. The jingle of those few coins when Clara shook it was not just humiliating. No, it was a funeral march. A funeral march for my motherly love, which, as it turned out, I had been carrying alone all these years. I thought of the movements. The Patek Philippe minute repeater I sold to pay for Clara's tuition. The rare Vacheron Constantin that went towards the down payment on her and Marcus's condo. The Breguet tourbillon that turned into a lavish wedding with 100 guests. Each sold piece was a part of my Arthur's soul, a part of my memory. I gave them treasures of the spirit, and they returned to me a piggy bank with a couple of coins for my funeral, so as not to burden themselves. In this simple bovine gesture was the entire essence of their relationship with me. I was not a mother, not a person. I was a resource a resource that, in their opinion, was coming to an end in which it was time to dispose of, shifting the responsibility for its disposal onto the resource itself. Lydia Petrovna. The voice of the hired MC pulled me out of the ringing void. Perhaps you would like to say a few words? A return toast, so to speak. He was smiling his professional practice smile. Clara and Marcus, pleased with the effect they had produced, were also looking at me. Their gazes held self-satisfaction and a slight contempt. Go on, old woman, say something. Thank us for our generosity. And I stood up. I don't know where the strength came from. A minute ago I felt crushed, invisible, turned into a piece of decor at someone else's party. But now, rising from my chair, I felt not an old woman's weakness, but a straight steel axis run through my spine. My back straightened on its own, my shoulders squared. I surveyed the hushed room. Arthur, do you hear this? They wanted to value your soul, your life's work, your love for the craft, in a couple of coins. They thought it was witty. They thought I would swallow it, just as I had swallowed their inattention before, their condescension, their endless requests disguised as stories of hardship. But everything has a limit. Even a mother's patience. Even mine. I took my glass of champagne. The bubbles lazily rose from the bottom. I waited until complete silence fell in the room. All eyes were on me. Clara was watching with an expectant smirk. Dear guests. My voice sounded even and calm, without a single trembling note. I surprised myself. I want to thank my daughter Clara and her husband Marcus for their foresight, and for their truly priceless gift. I paused, surveying their self-satisfied faces. Many of you probably thought this is just a piggy bank. A funny joke. But I saw in this gift a deep existential meaning. Clara, you gave me something much greater. You gave me freedom. The smirk on my daughter's face became a little less confident. She frowned in confusion. The freedom from future obligations. I continued in the same icy calm tone. The freedom from worries. And most importantly, the freedom from illusions. You have so clearly defined the boundaries of our relationship and my role in your life that it would be simply impolite not to respond in kind. I shifted my gaze from Clara to Marcus, who had stopped smiling and was now watching me with tense attention. In response to your foresight, Clara, I have also decided to bring clarity to my future, and to yours. Today, on my 70th birthday, I have made a final decision. I officially declare that I am making changes to my will. A barely perceptible whisper went through the room. The guests fidgeted in their chairs. My entire collection of antique watch movements and horological tools, I pronounced each word slowly and distinctly, the only real treasure I possess, the legacy of my late husband, Professor Arthur Vance, is no longer subject to inheritance by my daughter. Clara's face began to change. Disbelief, confusion. She still didn't understand what I was leading up to. For her, they had always been just dusty old gears. I have arranged for the entire collection, with all its catalogs and documents, to be donated free of charge to the foundation named after my husband at the university where he worked all his life. These funds, and believe me, they are substantial, will go towards grants for talented young artisans who, unlike some, see not dust in these mechanisms, but knowledge and light. And then it happened. There was a sharp metallic clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. I saw the fork fall from Clara's hand and hit the edge of her porcelain plate with a clang. The mask of the dutiful, loving daughter that she had worn so masterfully all evening cracked and crumbled like cheap plaster. Her true expression emerged on her face. A mixture of animal terror and panic. Her eyes, just moments before cold and mocking, were now wide open. She knew. Maybe she didn't understand the movements, but she had certainly heard the conversations with the antiquarians, had seen the sums when I sold parts of the collection for her needs. She knew it wasn't about dust, but about a whole apartment in the city center, maybe even two. Marcus froze. His face became an immobile mask, but I saw a cold, angry fire light up in the depths of his eyes, the fire of an analyst who has just realized that his long-term project has ended in complete failure. I raised my glass a little higher. To freedom, I said quietly, but everyone heard me. And to a clear future. Mine. And I drained my glass to the dregs. Then slowly, under the gazes of dozens of stunned people, I sat down in my place. The noisy, cheerful celebration in my honor had turned into a wake for their expectations. I placed my palm on the cold back of the pink pig. It no longer seemed humiliating to me. Now it was a symbol of my liberation. The party in my honor was over, but my real life, it seemed, had just begun. The rest of the evening passed in a fog. I politely declined dances, nodded in response to someone's sympathetic or, conversely, disapproving glances, and sat until the end, as befits the guest of honor. I was calm. The emptiness inside, left after that click, turned out to be not heavy but surprisingly light. As if I had been carrying an unbearable sack of stones on my shoulders my whole life, and now, finally, the straps had broken, and it had fallen to the ground with a crash. I was free. Clara and Marcus tried hard to pretend that nothing had happened, but their cheerfulness was strained and false. They avoided my gaze. The guests left quickly, awkwardly saying goodbye to me. This anniversary will be remembered for a long time, I thought, watching them go, but for completely different reasons than its organizers had intended. I returned home alone, having refused their offer of a ride. I needed to walk, to breathe the night air, to establish myself in my new state. Entering my apartment, the first thing I did was turn on the light in the study. The movements in their velvet trays looked back at me from their shelves. Silent, faithful, my only true witnesses. "Forgive me," I whispered, running my fingers over a polished wooden case. "Forgive me for not seeing the obvious for so long." I woke up in the morning with a clear head, the likes of which I hadn't had in years. There was no regret, no doubt, no resentment. Only a cold, transparent resolve. I made myself coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city wake up. Yesterday seemed like a dream, a bad theatrical performance, but the pink piggy bank, which I had brought with me after all and placed on the dresser in the hallway, was irrefutable proof of reality. It stood there, smiling foolishly, a monument to my past. Around noon the doorbell rang. I had no doubt who it was. I opened it calmly. On the threshold stood Clara and Marcus. My daughter's face wore a caring, slightly reproachful smile. "Mommy, you really put on a show yesterday," she sang, entering the apartment and trying to embrace me. "What a performance! You scared everyone so much, honestly." I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the hug either. I just stood there, letting her arms encircle my shoulders. Clara, feeling my stillness, quickly stepped back. Her smile faltered for a moment but immediately returned. "We were worried you weren't answering your calls," she continued, taking off her elegant shoes. "I was sleeping," I answered simply. "Come into the room." They walked into the living room, where shelves of movements lined all the walls. Marcus looked around with the air of a master surveying a somewhat neglected but generally promising property. He sat in an armchair, crossing his legs. Clara perched on the edge of the sofa. "Mom, why did you do that?" she began placatingly. "We wanted to do what was best, to joke around. And you, a will, some foundation." The guests were in shock. It didn't look good. I silently looked at her expensive cashmere suit, at her perfect manicure, at the face I had known since its first appearance in the world. And I saw that she didn't understand at all. She sincerely believed that the problem was my incorrect reaction to their harmless joke, that it was I who had ruined everyone's evening. "Eleanor," Marcus spoke up. His tone was condescending, like an adult explaining to a child why you can't play with matches. "Clara means that such things are not done in the heat of the moment. You were upset, we understand. Emotions. Age again, age." There it was, the key word, the access code to their condescension. They considered me a senile old woman who had thrown a tantrum to get attention. It never even occurred to them that I could act consciously and rationally. In their worldview, I was an object, not a subject. A function, not a person. "Listen, we're not against your hobbies," he continued his mentoring monologue. "But you have to be realistic. These papers of yours, they have no real value without proper expertise, cataloging, authentication. It's a huge job that costs money and time. The university doesn't need it. They have enough of their own worries. They'll just put them in some damp basement, and everything will rot. You don't want that for your husband's collection, do you? He spoke so convincingly, so pragmatically. He laid out logical arguments before me like a game of solitaire, confident that I would inevitably lose. 10 years ago, I would have given in. 5 years ago, I would have doubted. But not today. Today I saw not logic but manipulation. He wasn't trying to convince me but to devalue my decision to make it look foolish and meaningless. It's just old paper, Mom, Clara chimed in. Who needs it besides you? You just wanted to punish us. Okay, we're sorry. The joke was in bad taste. Let's forget about it. We're family. Family. The second code word. The password that used to open any door in my soul. But the lock had been changed. I was silent, letting them talk. I looked at them and saw two strangers. Businesslike, cynical, confident in their rightness and in my imminent retreat. They hadn't come to ask for forgiveness. They had come to correct my mistake, to return me to the stable where I was supposed to wait obediently until they needed my property. Their self-confidence was almost palpable. They were convinced that it was just an old woman's whim, that I would scream, be offended, and then everything would go back to normal. After all, it had always been that way. I had always yielded, always forgiven, always put myself in their shoes. They simply couldn't imagine another scenario. And it was their blindness, their complete inability to see me as a person with my own will, that strengthened my resolve with every second. Are you finished? I asked when Marcus paused to take a breath. They exchanged glances. My calm tone disconcerted them. Well, yes, Clara mumbled. Mom, let's just forget it. I won't forget, I answered just as quietly. And this wasn't a whim. I wasn't upset. On the contrary, yesterday, for the first time in many years, I felt absolute clarity. Eleanor, don't be a child. Marcus began to lose his patience. I won't be. I stood up, making it clear that the conversation was over. Thank you for visiting, but I need to make a few calls. They left the apartment in complete bewilderment. Their plan to quickly smooth things over had failed. But I could see from their faces that they still didn't believe it. They decided that I was just sulking and needed time to cool down. Think carefully, Mom, Clara said from the hallway. Think about us. About your only daughter. I closed the door behind them, looked at the pink pig on the dresser. They're thinking about you, I said to it. They think it's all about you. Then I went into the study, sat at my husband's desk, took the phone book and dialed a number. Hello. Is this the legal department of the University Foundation? My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm calling about the donation of a large collection of antique watch movements. Yes, the decision is final. When could your specialist come for a preliminary inspection? The conversation with the University Foundation representative was short and businesslike. The young man on the other end was skeptical at first, probably used to eccentric calls. But when I mentioned my husband's name and a few key pieces from the collection, his tone changed instantly. We agreed on a meeting for the following week. He asked me to prepare any available documents confirming the authenticity and provenance of the movements, if possible. It will significantly speed up the process, he said. Of course, there were documents. Arthur was a meticulous and neat man. Every valuable piece was accompanied by a certificate, an expert opinion, and sometimes a whole history of ownership. He kept all the most important papers not at home, but in a bank safe deposit box. After his death, I had put the deed to the apartment, our marriage certificate, and a few letters dear to me, but not materially, in the same box. I hadn't been to that bank in years. There was no need. The next morning I got dressed, took my bag and the key to the box, and went downtown. The weather was gray, matching my mood. But it was no longer that all-consuming anguish, but rather a focused, cold melancholy. I wasn't thinking about Clara and Marcus. I was thinking about Arthur, about his legacy, and about the fact that I was finally doing the right thing. I was fulfilling his will, albeit many years late. The bank smelled of money and air conditioning. Silence, broken only by the quiet hum of computers and the rustle of paper. I walked the familiar path to the vault, and a polite employee escorted me to a small room for working with the safe deposit box. The heavy metal door closed behind me and I was alone. I inserted my key, the employee hissed. A double click of the lock. I pulled out the heavy metal box and placed it on the table. Inside were several leather folders tied with ribbons. I felt no trepidation, only a businesslike focus. I needed to find the folder labeled certificates. I untied the first one. Documents for the apartment, my husband's death certificate. I mechanically checked them, although I knew everything was in place. I set it aside. The second folder. It contained our letters to each other, which we wrote when he went on research trips. I didn't open them. Not now. Too painful. And here was the third folder. The one. Certificates in provenance. I opened it. On top was Arthur's neatly compiled catalog, written in his small, neat handwriting. Under it was a stack of files, each containing yellowed, watermarked papers, expert opinions, and notarized deeds of gift from past centuries. This was the documentary soul of the collection. I began to go through them to refresh my memory of what exactly I would need for the lawyers from the foundation. I was almost finished when my fingers touched something that shouldn't have been there. A few sheets of crisp, white paper held together by a paperclip. They were tucked into the very bottom of the folder, almost hidden under the old documents. It looked like an ordinary modern contract. I pulled them out, puzzled. I didn't remember putting them there. I put on the reading glasses I always carried in my bag and read the title, printed in bold. General Power of Attorney for the Disposition of All Movable and Immovable Property. A chill went down my spine. I skimmed the text. I, Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby entrust to citizen Clara Thorne. What followed was a long list of powers: to sell, buy, gift, exchange, mortgage, receive money, open and close accounts, represent my interests in all instances, in essence, to do whatever she pleased with my property. And below on the last page was my signature. Legible, clear, mine. Next to it was the blue seal of a notary and his signature. I sat in the sterile silence of the bank room, and the air suddenly became icy and stopped entering my lungs. My memory helpfully supplied an image. A month ago, Clara had come to me, agitated and businesslike. "Mom, there are new rules at the Social Security office. We need to update your data urgently, or your pension will be delayed or even recalculated to your disadvantage. I've prepared everything. You just need to sign in a few places. I'll take it all myself so you don't have to stand in lines." She had placed a stack of papers in front of me, at least 10 sheets. On top was indeed some form with the Social Security logo. "Here, here, and here." She had pointed to the signature lines. I wasn't feeling well that day, my blood pressure was fluctuating. I trusted her. How could a daughter deceive her own mother in such a matter? I didn't read carefully. I just signed where she showed me. She hurried me, saying she was late for a meeting. Then she gathered the papers, kissed me on the cheek, and left. And here was one of those papers in front of me, the one that had been hidden in the middle of the stack. The General Power of Attorney. But that wasn't the end. Under the Power of Attorney was another document. Its title made my vision blur. Advanced Directive and Appointment of a Healthcare Proxy. I gripped the paper. According to this document, I, Eleanor Vance, was giving my advance consent to any medical procedures, including placement in a specialized closed-type facility, in the event that my condition was deemed to prevent me from making my own decisions. And the person authorized to make these decisions for me was appointed as Clara Thorne. And again my signature at the bottom and the seal of the same notary. But the most terrible part was in the last clause, typed in fine print. This document shall enter into legal force 30/30 calendar days from the date of signing. I looked at the date. The power of attorney and the directive had been signed 28 days ago. In 2 days. In just 2 days, Clara would have complete, unlimited power over my life, my body, and my property. The plan was horrifyingly simple and cynical. They didn't just want to get the inheritance after my death. They didn't want to wait. Why? Why wait for a funeral they weren't going to pay for? It was much easier to get everything at once. In 2 days, this power of attorney would come into effect. Then, with my voluntary consent in hand, with the help of a pocket doctor, they would have me declared incompetent, unable to be responsible for my actions. The old lady is rambling, confusing dates, suffering from dementia. Who would doubt it? And that's it. I could be packed off to some private nursing home far from sight. And my apartment, my priceless collection, all my savings, everything would come under their full control. No wills, no disputes, no waiting. The piggy bank given at the anniversary was not just a cruel joke. It was the mockery of a victor. The final chord in their play. They already considered me written off. They were already mentally disposing of my property. This gift was just the cherry on top of their triumph. They were enjoying my humiliation, knowing that in a few weeks, all that would be left of me was a legal fiction, a shadow locked in four walls. I sat in the cold, airless space of the safe deposit box room, and I felt no fear, no tears. The icy clarity that had visited me at the anniversary had turned into tempered steel. I thought I had reached the bottom of betrayal when I saw that piggy bank. How wrong I was. The bottom was much deeper. But as I stared at the documents, another detail, a small, almost insignificant one, caught my eye. The notary's name, Albert Finch. It was an unusual name. And it was a name I knew. It was the name of the man who had sold the workshop to my husband's grandfather over a century ago. The man who had started the collection. It had to be a coincidence. A cruel, ironic coincidence. I carefully folded the two documents and put them separately in my bag. I returned the other certificates to the folder, tied the ribbon, and pushed the box back into its slot. The lock clicked. I walked out of the vault into the brightly lit banking hall. The world hadn't changed. People were still rushing somewhere, cashiers were counting money. But I had changed. The Eleanor who had entered an hour ago, a naive woman deceived in her best feelings, had died. She died there in the cold room with the heavy door. And another woman came out, one who now knew that she was fighting not just for her dignity. She was fighting for her life. Leaving the bank, I didn't go home. I walked down the street, not knowing where I was going, and there was no chaos in my head. On the contrary, a crystal-clear plan of action was forming. What I had discovered in the box hadn't broken me. It had given me strength. Now I knew that my toast at the anniversary was not just a retort, but a preemptive strike that I myself had been unaware of. My intuition, pushed into the farthest corner of my consciousness, had worked before my reason had grasped the full depth of the abyss. My late husband, Arthur, had been friends with a very good lawyer, Mr. Sterling, a man of the old school, smart, decent. He had helped Arthur with the registration of some particularly valuable movements. I hadn't seen him in years, but I knew his firm still existed. I found it in the directory and went there without an appointment. Mr. Sterling greeted me with surprise, but with great warmth. He had aged, his hair had turned gray, but his gaze remained as sharp and attentive as ever. I didn't beat around the bush. I silently placed the two documents from the safe deposit box on his desk, which was covered with green cloth. He read them slowly, rereading the wording several times. His face grew darker and darker. When he finished, he took off his glasses, wiped them, and looked at me over the rims. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "do you understand what this is?" "I do now," I replied. "I signed it 28 days ago, thinking they were papers for the Social Security office." He shook his head, not with condemnation but with bitterness. "A classic scheme. Foolproof. If you hadn't accidentally looked in the box in 2 days, you would have woken up in a different reality, and it would have been almost impossible to prove anything. Your signature is there. The notary certified it. Everything is legal formally. What can I do?" I asked. My voice didn't tremble. I wasn't asking for help. I was requesting instructions. Everything. His eyes glinted. "We can do everything. And we must do it immediately. Right now we will draft and have my trusted notary certify a statement revoking the powers of attorney issued in your daughter's name. All of them, including this one. We will send the notification to her and her husband by registered mail with a courier today, so they receive it under signature. He worked quickly and efficiently. While his assistant prepared the documents, he asked me clarifying questions. Had there been other incidents? Had they tried to access my accounts before? Had Clara recently asked for any medical certificates from the clinic? Every answer I gave fit into the overall picture, and that picture was ugly. 2 hours later, I left his office with a copy of the revocation statement in my bag. Mr. Sterling shook my hand at the door. "Hold on, Eleanor. This is just the beginning. They won't give up so easily. But now you are not alone." That evening I sat at home. In front of me on the table was the collection catalog, compiled by Arthur's hand. I waited. I knew the storm would break very soon. At the same time, in their chic apartment, bought with money from the sale of a part of my soul, Clara and Marcus were having dinner. They had already calmed down after my morning visit. They decided that the old woman would rebel and then settle down. They just had to wait it out. Marcus was just telling Clara how profitably they could invest the money after selling this junk. When the courier rang the doorbell, Clara signed for the thick envelope. She opened it, still wondering who could have sent them a registered letter. She skimmed the lines of the official notification. Her face elongated. "What is it?" Marcus asked lazily, spearing a piece of salmon with his fork. She revoked the power of attorney," Clara whispered. "All of them." Marcus choked. "How did she revoke it?" "She couldn't have. She doesn't know. There's an official paper from a notary. Revocation of the general power of attorney and the other document." At that moment, Clara's cell phone rang. She saw Realtor Sergey on the screen and answered. "Yes, Sergey, what? How revoked? I don't understand. We've already found a buyer." "No, she couldn't have changed her mind." Marcus snatched the phone from her. "Sergey, it's Marcus. What's going on? What other permission has been revoked?" He listened and his face turned to stone. "I see. No, don't do anything. I'll handle it myself." He threw the phone on the table. The world they had so carefully built began to crumble. But that wasn't the end. Marcus rushed to his laptop. He quickly opened his email. There was a new letter. Sender: the Professor Vance Legacy Foundation. Subject: official confirmation of the gift acceptance procedure. He opened the letter. Inside was a polite but absolutely unambiguous text. The foundation thanked Eleanor Vance for her generous decision and informed her that a commission would arrive next week for a preliminary assessment and inventory of the assets being transferred. The entire procedure would be conducted under the legal supervision of Mr. Sterling's law firm. It was a knockout. It was one thing to have empty threats from an offended old woman at a holiday table. It was quite another to have official letters from lawyers, notaries, and university foundations. Their world had collapsed in one evening. The house of cards they had built for so long, and with such cynicism, had crumbled from my one decision. Panic, cold and sticky, filled their expensive living room. "She knows everything," Clara screamed, her voice breaking into a shriek. "She was at the bank. She found the papers. How? How did she guess?" "Quiet." Marcus barked at her, something he had never done before. He paced the room like a caged animal. His pragmatic, calculating mind was frantically searching for a way out, but all paths were cut off. Not just the inheritance, not just the apartment. Everything. The control. The power they already considered theirs, which they almost held in their hands, had slipped away. "That old hag, she calculated everything," Marcus muttered, clutching his head. "That toast, it wasn't a whim, it was a move. She was playing with us." Their panic quickly turned to rage. The rage of losers, the rage of deceived predators whose prey had been snatched from under their noses. And this rage was directed at me, at the source of all their troubles, at the old woman who dared to have her own will. My apartment was quiet. I finished my cold tea and looked at the phone. It was silent, but I knew it was the calm before the storm. They would come. They couldn't not come. They would need to vent their anger, to try to get back with threats and screams what they believed belonged to them by right. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I was sitting in a fortress built of old books and a newfound resolve. And I knew I could withstand any siege. I was not mistaken in my expectations. It was no more than an hour before the doorbell began to ring. Not just ring but pound. Long, furious, demanding chimes, interspersed with fists hitting the wooden paneling. That's not how guests ring. That's how people break in. I didn't hurry. I slowly stood up, straightened my housecoat, and walked down the hallway. Muffled, angry voices could be heard from behind the door. I looked through the peephole. Clara and Marcus. My daughter's face was contorted with anger, red blotches on her cheeks and neck. Marcus stood slightly behind, his jaw clenched. His gaze was heavy and prickly. I turned the key in the lock and opened the door. They burst into the hallway like a gust of icy wind. Clara didn't even take off her shoes, clattering her expensive ankle boots on the clean parquet floor. "What have you done?" she screamed from the threshold, pointing a finger at me, on which the diamond I had given her for her 40th birthday sparkled. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus silently closed the door behind him. This gesture was more eloquent than any words. They hadn't come for a conversation. They had come for an interrogation, for a reckoning. "Come into the room," I said evenly, stepping back into the apartment. "There's no need to shout in the hallway." My calmness seemed to add fuel to the fire. "No need to shout?" Her voice broke into a shriek. "You've ruined my life. You've ruined everything. And you're telling me not to shout." They flew into the living room. Clara paced the room from one bookshelf to another, as if looking for something to break, to destroy. "You betrayed me," she screamed, turning to me. "You hate me. You always have. You always cared more about your dusty papers. You loved them more than your own daughter." I stood by the table, leaning on its carved edge. I looked at her and felt nothing but a cold detachment, as if watching a tantrum of a stranger's spoiled child in a store. All these accusations, which would have once wounded me to the core, now bounced off my armor, not even leaving a scratch because I knew the truth. "Do you even understand what you've done?" she continued relentlessly. "You've left your only daughter with nothing. You've thrown me out on the street. With nothing." It was astonishing. She had a beautiful apartment, a high-paying job, a husband, a car, foreign vacations. She had everything many couldn't even dream of. And most of it was paid for by those same dusty papers that I had sold, cutting back on my own life. But in her coordinate system, none of that counted. With nothing meant without my inheritance, without the right to dispose of what had never belonged to her. "Calm down," Marcus intervened. He walked over to Clara, put a hand on her shoulder, but he was looking at me. His tactic was different. Not screaming but a veiled threat. "Eleanor, your daughter is just emotional. You have to understand. Your actions yesterday, these letters today, it looks very bad. People might think there's something wrong with you. Such impulsive, illogical behavior at your age. It could have legal consequences for you." He emphasized the words age, illogical behavior, consequences. He was still playing the same game. He was alluding to their original plan, to have me declared incompetent. He was sure I knew nothing and was trying to scare me with the specter of a psychiatric evaluation. "You decided to punish us for some stupid joke?" Clara screamed again. "To deprive your own daughter of everything because of a cheap piggy bank. Is that normal? Is that motherly?" I listened to them in silence. I let them vent everything. Clara's rage, Marcus's cold threat. I wanted to see it all to the end, to make sure that at the bottom there was nothing left but this. When they had exhausted themselves a bit, and a heavy ringing silence hung in the room, broken only by Clara's sobs, I took a step towards the table. On it lay the folder I had brought from the lawyer. I slowly opened it, took out one sheet of paper, and placed it on the polished surface of the table. It was a photocopy of that same advance directive for medical intervention. I pushed it towards them. "You say I left you with nothing, Clara?" I asked very quietly. They stared at the paper. Clara didn't understand what it was yet. But Marcus, I saw his face change. The mask of confidence slipped, revealing confusion and then fear. He recognized the document. He had, no doubt, drafted it himself. I left you with exactly what you had prepared for me. I continued in the same quiet, colorless voice. Emptiness. A complete zero. Deprivation of all property will future. The only difference between us is that I was ready to wait for my natural death, and you were not. An absolute dead silence fell in the room. Clara leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the lines. Placement in a specialized closed-type facility. Authorized Representative Clara Thorne. I saw the blood drain from her face. She looked up at me, and in her eyes, for the first time in many years, I saw no anger, no irritation, no condescension. I saw primal terror, the terror of exposure, the terror of a criminal caught red-handed. Her mouth fell open. She wanted to say something but couldn't make a sound. She just stared at me, and in that gaze was everything. Shock, understanding, the realization of a complete and final failure. She understood that I knew. Everything down to the very bottom. Marcus froze like a pillar of salt. His pragmatic brain, capable of finding a way out of any situation, had failed. He hadn't foreseen this. His perfect plan had no clause for what to do if she found out everything before the deadline. All his feigned confidence, his threats about my unstable state, had crumbled to dust. What unstable state, when here on the table lay irrefutable proof of their cold, calculated conspiracy? And I thought it was about the piggy bank. I finished my monologue, speaking as if into the void, that it was just the height of cynicism and greed. But it turned out to be just a rehearsal. A dress rehearsal before taking everything from me, without waiting for the funeral you so generously refused to pay for. Clara slowly sank onto the sofa. She held her head in her hands. She wasn't crying. She was in shock. I looked at them, at my daughter, crushed by the horror of exposure, and at her husband, the strategist, whose brilliant plan had turned against him. And for the first time in many days, I felt not a cold emptiness but something else. Not gloating, no, but a bitter, heavy satisfaction. Justice, though delayed, had been served. Here, in this room filled with the books they despised, their world had collapsed completely and irrevocably. I silently turned and went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. I had nothing more to say to them. They left my apartment not as they had entered. There were no screams, no threats. They left in silence, shamefully, like beaten dogs. Claire didn't look up at me. Marcus, passing by, threw me a look of complete, undisguised, powerless hatred. The door closed quietly behind them, but I knew this wasn't the end. People like Marcus don't give up. They just change tactics. When a frontal assault fails, they have to come from the flank. And I was right. A week later, I received an official summons. I was being called to a meeting of a medico-social commission, at the request of my daughter, Clara Thorne, to determine my legal capacity. Attached to the summons was a copy of Clara's statement. It said that I had recently been suffering from memory lapses, behaving inadequately, showing unprovoked aggression, and could not be responsible for my actions. The cherry on top was a conclusion from a certain neurologist, a PhD, attached to the statement, which stated in black and white, progressive senile dementia of the Alzheimer's type. They had decided to go all the way. Even after I showed them that I knew about their plan, they decided to use a part of it. Probably Marcus decided that since they had started, it was too late to retreat. They found a corrupt doctor who, for a certain sum, agreed to give me a diagnosis without even seeing me. It was their last desperate move. They're all in. They hoped that an official paper from a PhD would outweigh my words, and the commission, consisting of tired civil servants, would not go into details and would simply make a decision based on the evidence presented. Receiving these papers, I was not afraid. I felt a cold rage, but I was ready. Immediately after that memorable visit from Clara and Marcus, I had made one very important call. I had called Philip Sterling. Philip was not just a friend of our family. He had been Arthur's friend since their student days. They had gone through life together. He was one of the most respected neurologists in the country, a professor and academician, a man with a crystal-clear reputation and an unbending character. After Arthur's death, we saw each other less often, but I knew I could always count on him. I went to his clinic, told him everything as it was, About the anniversary, the piggy bank, the discovery in the safe deposit box. I showed him all the documents. Philip listened in silence. His thick gray eyebrows drew together, and his eyes darkened. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, then he sighed heavily. "What filth, Eleanor," he said finally. "What absolute filth. Arthur would not have survived this. It's a good thing he didn't live to see this day. What should I do, Philip? They won't stop. And we won't let them." He decisively slapped his palm on the table. "First, I will conduct a full, most thorough examination of you officially with all the tests, protocols, and conclusions. Second," he squinted slyly, "I will go to this commission of yours with you as an independent expert. Let's see how this PhD looks next to an academician." On the day of the commission, I arrived at the dreary, official building a little early. In the hallway, I saw Clara and Marcus. They were sitting on a bench next to the office. Next to them sat a well-groomed, self-satisfied-looking man in his 50s. I immediately knew this was the doctor. Clara, seeing me, flinched and turned away. Marcus, however, looked at me with a cold, victorious smirk. They were confident in their victory. They had a paper. And what did I have? Only the words of an old woman. They didn't know that I had not come alone. When we were called into the office, I went in first. 3 people sat at the table: the chairwoman of the commission, an elderly woman with a tired face, and 2 doctors. Clara, Marcus, and their expert followed. "Hello, Eleanor," the chairwoman began in an indifferent tone. "We are here at the request of your daughter. She is concerned about your condition. We have a conclusion from Dr. Orloff." Dr. Orloff coughed self-importantly. "May I come in?" A calm, deep baritone was heard from behind the door at that moment. The door opened and Philip Sterling walked into the office, tall, straight, in a strict suit, with a briefcase in his hand. The chairwoman looked up at him, and her face changed. She recognized him. Both doctors at the table stood up. "Professor Sterling," she said with astonishment and respect. "Hello, colleagues," Philip nodded. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here as an independent expert at the invitation of my longtime friend and patient, Eleanor Vance. I would like to be present and, with your permission, present my own conclusion." The look on Marcus's face at that moment was something to see. The self-confidence instantly vanished from it, replaced by a pale confusion. Clara looked at Philip with open horror, and their PhD Orloff shrank, pressed himself into his chair, and seemed to have become half his size. He knew perfectly well who Professor Sterling was. Of course, Professor Sterling, please have a seat," the chairwoman bustled. The meeting turned into a farce. First, Clara's statement and Orloff's conclusion were read out. Then I was given the floor. I calmly and clearly, without emotion, stated the essence of the matter, told about the anniversary, the gift, and my decision regarding the collection. "As you can see," Marcus interjected, "an inadequate reaction to a harmless joke, leading to impulsive actions that harm her own family." And then Philip took the floor. He stood up, opened his briefcase, and placed a hefty folder on the chairman's desk. "Colleagues," he began in his weighty, brooking no objection voice, "I have known Eleanor for over 40 years, but friendship is one thing, and medicine is another. Therefore, 2 weeks ago, I conducted a full comprehensive examination of her cognitive functions according to all modern international protocols. Here are the results." He pointed to the folder. On the MMSE scale, 30 points out of 30. Tests for memory, attention, speech, thinking. Absolutely normal for her age. Moreover, her intellectual level and reaction speed are higher than those of many 40-year-olds. He paused, surveying the stunned members of the commission, and then turned his heavy gaze on Dr. Orloff. "Therefore, I am particularly interested in on what basis the respected colleague Orloff made a diagnosis of progressive dementia. As far as I know, such a diagnosis cannot be made in absentia. Did you conduct an examination, Dr. Orloff? Did you meet with the patient?" Orloff turned pale, then red. He mumbled something about data obtained from relatives and a characteristic clinical picture. Characteristic of what? Philip asked in an icy tone. Of forgery? Colleagues, I think that this case should be dealt with not only by our commission but also by the Licensing Commission of the Ministry of Health. I think they will be very interested in Dr. Orloff's diagnostic methods. It was the end. The curtain. The phrase Licensing Commission had the effect of holy water on a demon on Orloff. He jumped up, muttering something about a mistake and a misunderstanding, and almost ran out of the office. Marcus sat with a stone face, staring at one point. Clara was crying silently, her face in her hands. Their last, dirtiest plan had collapsed, burying them under its rubble. And it had collapsed publicly in front of the medical authorities. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Eleanor, we apologize. The meeting is closed. Your daughter's request is, of course, denied. I stood up, looked at my daughter, huddled in a ball on her chair. And for the first time in all this time, I felt something akin to pity. Not for her, but for the little girl with ribbons in her hair that she once was. Where had it all gone? When and why had her soul become so calloused? I didn't wait for them to leave. I just nodded to Philip, and we left the office together. The sun was shining outside, and I breathed deeply. Freedom was not just a word. It was the air I was breathing. 6 months passed. Autumn was replaced by snow, and then by the timid spring thaw. During that time, everything in my life changed, and most importantly, I myself changed. The silence in my apartment ceased to be oppressive. It became meaningful, filled not with loneliness, but with solitude. The process of transferring the collection to the university turned out to be a slow but surprisingly pleasant affair. The Foundation's lawyers worked efficiently, and the young expert archivists they sent to compile the inventory looked at the movements with eyes full of reverence. The same eyes my Arthur once looked at them with. I helped them, told them the story of each piece, shared my husband's memories. My apartment, which Marcus had seen only as square meters, turned into a real research center for several months. The shelves gradually emptied. At first, I was a little sad to see these gaps, as if the soul were leaving the house. But then I realized that the soul was not going anywhere. It was simply moving to a new, more reliable home, where it would be valued and cherished, where it would serve not one person but hundreds. My husband's collection ceased to be my personal locked-up treasure. It became a public domain. With the money received from the foundation as a life annuity, and the sum turned out to be more than decent, the first thing I did was establish a named grant. The Professor Arthur Vance Grant for Young Researchers in the History of Horology. When I signed the documents, I felt that Arthur was standing next to me and approvingly putting his hand on my shoulder. His legacy would now live on not only in the form of antique movements, but also in the form of new discoveries, new names, new knowledge. The university rector, having learned about my role in cataloging the collection, offered me the position of a consultant in the Rare Books and Manuscripts Archive. 3 days a week, I come to the quiet, light-filled repository, which smells of old paper and history. I help graduate students and students find the necessary materials, share what I know, and I see in their eyes not pity for an old woman, but sincere respect and interest. Sometimes they come to my home. My living room, where such ugly scenes once played out, is now often filled with young, ringing voices. We drink tea with my signature pies I started baking again, and argue about Brigitte and Daniels. They tell me about their plans, about their dreams. They don't ask me for money. They ask for advice. They see me not as a resource but as a mentor. And I realized that this was the kind of family I had been missing all these years. A family not of blood, but of spirit. I heard almost nothing about Clara and Marcus. Mr. Sterling, my lawyer, informed me that Dr. Orloff had indeed lost his license after the scandal at the commission. This caused a small resonance in medical circles. And Marcus's name, as the organizer of this scam, also surfaced in an unflattering context. Seems to have hit his business reputation. Clara tried to call me several times, but I didn't answer the phone. What could she say to me? What could I answer her? A scorched earth lay between us, on which nothing could grow anymore. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't need her pity. I didn't wish them ill. I just erased them from my life like an unsuccessful draft. Their future fate no longer interested me. One day, sorting through my husband's old papers, I came across his diary. On one of the pages, dated the year of Clara's birth, he had written, "Our daughter was born today. I look at her and dream that she will grow up to be a person for whom the treasures of the Spirit will always be more important than any others. That she will inherit not our things, but our love for knowledge, for beauty, for truth." I closed the diary. His dream had not come true in his daughter. But maybe it will come true in those young people who will now study his collection. Maybe my action is the true fulfillment of his will. Today, one of my graduate students came to the archive, a very talented young man named Kirill, who is writing a dissertation on early 18th century escapements. He is working on a grant in my husband's name. "Eleanor, I found it." His eyes were burning. "Remember we were talking about a possible prototype for one of Harrison's early marine chronometers? I found a mention in the letters. It seems our hypothesis is correct." I smiled. I took a small thin box from a special safe. The first prototype of the grasshopper escapement. Carefully, with special gloves, I placed it on a velvet stand on the table. The evening sun pierced through the high archive window, and its ray fell directly on the yellowed brass. Kirill looked at the movement with such delight, with such tenderness, as if something alive were in front of him. I looked at the light falling on the immortal mechanism, at the enthusiastic face of the young scientist, at the life's work of my husband, which had found a new life. And at that moment I thought with absolute ringing clarity. They wanted me to save for my death, and for the first time in many years, I began to invest in life. Thank you for being with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and write in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Your thoughts and support are the greatest reward for me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Be healthy, value yourself, and live truly.